Hi, everyone. Welcome to All Things Aviation and Aerospace. I'm Vince Mickens. Today, I'm going to familiarize you with an organization that is considered a leading advocate for, as well as a representative of, the aerospace and defense industries. It's called the Aerospace Industries Association. And while it's been around for over a century, founded in 1919 to be exact, the Aerospace Industries Association, otherwise known as AIA, is considered the quintessential voice for aircraft, space, and defense industries. Given all the opportunities as of late in aviation, aerospace, and defense workforce sectors, I thought this would be an opportune time to hear from two expert representatives from AIA who will not only tell us more about the organization, but provide insight that is focused particularly in the area of civil aviation, including the latest push in sustainability and what it means for the next generation of aerospace engineers and scientists. Joining me today is Dorothy Reimold, who goes by Dee, thank goodness, because I almost messed up her last name. Dee is vice president for civil aviation and has had a long-standing career in aviation policy, international affairs, and oversight of critical aerospace systems and services. Prior to joining AIA, Dee was the deputy vice president for the FAA's fleet of aircraft, their aviation inspector training, and flight inspections throughout the National Airspace System and the Department of Defense bases around the world. Dee, welcome to All Things Aviation and Aerospace.
Thanks, Vince. Delighted to be here today.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Also with Dee from AIA is David Hyde. David is their Senior Director of Sustainability who collaborates with AIA members to advance the industry's sustainability goals for the aviation, space, and national security sectors. Boy, that was a mouthful. But I'm sure David will help us understand it better, given that sustainability is on the front burner these days. David recently joined AIA from the World Economic Forum, where he led and spearheaded multiple global initiatives to advance sustainability and innovation within the aviation industry. David, welcome to All Things Aviation and Aerospace.
Thanks so much, Vince. Really looking forward to the discussion today.
Well, it's really great to have you guys on, and this is great to talk about your association and what you guys do. We don't always hear about it every day, even though it's kind of right there in front of us. So I'm really glad to have both of you on, and particularly with your backgrounds and everything. I think I wanted to start things out, and I'll go straight to you, Dee, on this, and get things started to talk about just what AI is and what you guys do.
Yeah, that's great, Vince. So happy to do that. And again, just really, very much looking forward to the discussion about all things aviation. So AIA is a trade association. And as Vince mentioned, we've been around a while. Representing more than 320 different companies, and it ranges from the bigs in aerospace, the names that everyone hears every single day, the Boeings, the GEs, the Raytheons, et cetera, across the board to some of the new, what we call the new entrants, the flying taxi people. So we've got just a real richness in the kind of array of members that we have. And the thing that I find most fascinating about such an organization representing so many interests is the richness of the discussions, because there's so many different perspectives. You've got people that have been in the aerospace field for a long, long time, and others that are, just getting started. So it's fascinating. But I think what's really important about AIA, in addition to the breadth of its membership, is what it does for the industry, the advocacy, the policy evaluation and promulgation, the representation of interests. And all of this is to ensure that our industry remains vibrant, remains a global force, and that the U.S. is continued to be recognized for its advances in this field. So I could talk about AIA and what it does all day long. And again, my perspective is kind of fun because I have worked with AIA for years and years and years. I came to work for them last year, so I've seen it. I think I'd call it in a 360. But let me ask David to share some perspectives, because what I think is very unique about David Hyde, David actually rejoined AIA. He was here and then went to the World Economic Forum, and he came back, and so. I think he probably has a very unique perspective on what AIA has been and where it is going now. David?
Thanks, Dee. Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I recently rejoined AIA after about 2.5 years away. Obviously, lots of reasons. I came back. I sort of love this industry. I love being able to advocate for it. But I think AIA is just I think a really great example. The industry we represent is so important, not just to aviation or aerospace, but really to the whole of the US, to the entire economy. I think the latest figures we have are that throughout the aerospace supply chain, we have more than 2.2 million employees. We generate over $400 billion annually in economic output. Obviously, we're one of the biggest export sectors for the entire US. So from my perspective, representing AIA, representing the industry, is just a really great privilege, and looking forward to, obviously in my role, helping the industry adapt to the challenges it faces around sustainability, so it can continue to offer those benefits to the entire economy going forward.
Yeah, that's both of you have given a really great description of it. And I think something that you touched on, Dee, that we can expand on a little bit too, is how the industry is evolving. And there are new aspects of the industry coming into play. You used the term air taxi. The official term is advanced air mobility, air taxi. But things like that, and the drones and the type of drones and the usage of drones and all the other things that are coming into play, not to mention the space exploration, et cetera, and so forth. So this industry is in a kind of a growth spurt and an expansion phase right now, unlike we've seen in a very long time. So I think I'm excited about it, and I think it also affords a lot of opportunity for the next generation coming in, to have a lot of different areas that they can pursue and things like that. Can you guys talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. I defaulted to the term air taxi because we use a lot of acronyms in this industry. I think all industries do, and sometimes I've been sensitized to audiences like, what does that mean? Just because you use it 300 times a day doesn't mean that I understand it. Anyway, but I'm
Absolute point well taken.
But no, I'm glad you raise AAM, because that is the way we talk about it. And Vince, what I think is unique about this time that we're at is, there are so many possibilities out there, right? You mentioned commercial space, where and I actually had the good fortune to work in the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation for part of my career, but where we used to see, the periodic launch, right? Now there's a regular cadence. The FAA, let me just touch upon that. The FAA's role, related to like a SpaceX or a Blue Origin, is that the FAA licenses the launches and reentries. They don't handle commercial space like they do commercial aviation. It's not like they have to certify the vehicles or anything like that. But the FAA is issuing licenses for launches and reentries on a regular cadence, and we've seen an upturn. And what that also means is, so this is a developing sector for us, but it also brings with it a whole host of other considerations, like how do you mesh these new operations, or we talk about airspace integration, how do you mesh them safely and effectively, while you're continuing with, again, a lot of commercial aviation traffic. I mean, I think probably everyone that's listening on any given day, you hear the reports about how the commercial aviation industry has rebounded much more quickly post-COVID than had ever been anticipated. And, there's more demand for flights. And so, again, whether it's FAA as the US regulator or civil aviation regulators worldwide, they've got to accommodate these new entrants, the commercial space and Vince, the AAM, the drone operations, and all of that has to be
Absolutely.
done in a timely way, but most importantly in a safe way. And so I
Well,
think, oh,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm telling you, you can tell I kind of enjoy these topics, right? But
Yeah.
I think
I was just thinking that, I was down not too long, several weeks ago in Florida for almost 2 weeks. And it was interesting to me that there were, I think, 5 launches in that period
mhm,
from, and that was just there at NASA Kennedy Space Center. I know there are also launches that take place regularly. I love the term you use, cadence. There's a regular cadence of them also
mhm,
on the West Coast.
absolutely.
Um,
Yep,
and there's some here out of Wallop,
right.
in
Yeah,
Maryland.
and
So
on a clear day, sometimes you can see that bit of the
exactly.
contrail. Yeah,
But I think you bring up a real valuable point, and that's about the usage of the airspace and how do we share it and
right.
figure it all out and keep it safe. And then it really goes into David's realm when we start talking about environmental impact and therefore sustainability, and how that relates. David, I'll let you chime in on that.
Yeah, and I think I just want to echo what both you and Dee have said is that this is undoubtedly a really exciting time to be involved with the industry. You look at all of these new entrants, we have drones, advanced air mobility. In my space, you have innovations in terms of types of new aircraft, so electric aircraft on the horizon, potentially hydrogen aircraft going forward. Even things like sustainable aviation fuels are a huge innovation in and of themselves. I think it's also, we've talked about new entrants, but it's maybe also the innovation that isn't quite as obvious. Our entire industry has always been based on innovation. That's, I don't think, anywhere more obvious than if you look at sustainability.
That's the number one driving force of our industry, I think.
Absolutely. And I would say sustainability is a particularly good example of that. Airlines, our customers, in terms of manufacturers, have always really been driven by fuel efficiency. And if you look at some of the statistics about how that has improved over the last decades, going back maybe even to the beginning of the jet age, some of those numbers are really profound. And that's innovation that maybe you don't see just from looking at a plane. A plane now largely looks like a plane did 50 years ago, but significantly more efficient, significantly safer. And that's down to the sort of innovation the industry has always embraced. And now we're
Yeah,
obviously seeing a new type of innovation when it comes to these new entrants, and a desire, I think, to really push what we mean by aviation and how we will fly in the future.
yeah, I was just going to say too, because we were talking about it earlier. Dee brought up about the um, noise factor. And one of the sustainability and efficiency, I should say efficiency factors or environment in terms of the environment is reducing the noise footprint that we so used to experiencing. And it is amazing how much technology has come into play with that. And the thing that the engine manufacturers, Rolls-Royce, Pratt and Whitney, GE, and the rest of them are all doing a lot of development, research and development to come up with not only the most efficient, but the quietest, the one that puts out the engines that put out the least emissions and things like that.
Yeah. And I think there is, kind of building on this all is, the aspects of innovation are not just say in vehicle designs or their types of operations, but it's the materials that are used to build them and how those materials are manufactured. There's a robust discussion among regulators in terms of the implications of certifying products that may have had an AI, ML, or a artificial intelligence, machine learning aspect to it. And so you start thinking about the innovation is coming at us from all different fronts, and it's really calling on all of us to think through, because again, at the end of the day in aviation, our number one guiding light is safety, right? And the safety is derived by processes, some of which have been around for a long, long time. And some of those processes, do they still work? Do they apply to these new materials? Do they apply to these new operations? So it's really, again, just a fascinating set of considerations as we're progressing these new types of technologies.
Yeah. David, as we talk about this, tell us a little bit more about what you do, and more specifically, what you're doing now being back at AIA.
Sure. So in terms of my role, it's really ensuring that the industry has, I would say, the ability to achieve the really ambitious sustainability goals we've set. I'll focus mostly on civil aviation, as I think that's an area where it's really existential to the industry's future. We realize that to continue being able to enable people to travel, to continuing to be able to reap those benefits from flying, we really need to ensure that we maintain that license to operate and transition towards a sustainable future. As an industry, we've set a goal, along with airlines, along with the rest of the industry, of achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. That's obviously really ambitious and something we know that needs to happen. But it's also a really difficult goal. So to do that, we're going to need not just innovation within the industry, we're also going to need support from governments. We're going to need policies, investments to ramp up the enabling measures that we need to do that. In my role in AIA, a really big part is working with our membership to advocate for those investments, those policies, making sure that we have a common industry voice on those issues, and obviously that we work towards achieving those ambitious goals we've set.
So that brings me to the obvious question, or maybe not so obvious. How did you get into this? Where did this all start for you?
Well, as you can probably tell, I'm from the UK originally.
Oh, no, we hadn't noticed.
I'd actually fell into into aviation by accident, actually. So I was working in the UK government. I'd worked in a couple of different roles in different departments in the UK. And then this really interesting position came up in the Department for Transport, working on aviation noise policy, actually. And this was at the time a decision was being made on Heathrow expansion. So it was a really hot political topic. I thought it would be a really interesting opportunity to engage in a political, high priority political issue. But I sort of didn't have a background in aviation. I didn't necessarily think of it as a sector I wanted to be involved with. Once I was in, however, I was hooked. I immediately just thought it was the most interesting industry, even something that seems sort of away from maybe the core of the industry in terms of noise policy. You realize how sort of impactful
intricate it really is. Exactly. Yeah.
Just realizing the economics of when you schedule flights and why some flights need to fly at night. And then sort of, I know we see this a lot in Europe, sort of airports banning flights at night, the huge knock-on impacts that can have throughout the whole sector. So that was how I first got into the industry or got involved with aviation. I moved to the US about 7 years ago and was lucky enough to get my first stint with AIA, overseeing their environmental policy at the time, largely focused on the civil space. A really great opportunity to get involved with the industry, to get involved in the DC aviation environment. From there, I went on to the World Economic Forum, got to lead some really cool work looking at new technologies in terms of electric aviation, in terms of hydrogen aviation, also autonomy and AAM. But sort of I'm a DC person very much at heart now. So when the opportunity arose to come back to AIA and take on this new role, I was really excited to do that. And I said, I've been back for about 2 months, so still getting settled back in, but really excited to be able to advocate on behalf of the industry going forward.
Can I ask before you made that switch to the transportation sector there, what did you do before? What were a couple of your other jobs?
Yeah, so I actually joined the transportation department from the Department for Education in the UK. So I was working on education funding policy, something completely different. My background,
totally.
I have a history degree. So yeah, aviation wasn't something I pinpointed from an early age. But I think it's really interesting how regardless of maybe what your academic background is or what your particular skills are, there are those opportunities to employ skills, being in advocating, being able to communicate on behalf of the industry that maybe aren't the obvious ones that people think of when they think of flying or aviation.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. That was one of the things that I like to point out. And just the fact that, so you're a history major and you were doing something in a completely different aspect of it. And by the way, this industry will draw you in and it won't let you go. I guess you found that out. So many of us have had that. Now, there's people like myself that loved aviation from a very early age, but there are also so many of you out there that have that have had an interest in this industry, but never quite knew what you could do with it. Because most people associate it with either being a pilot, a mechanic, or maybe some type of an engineering role. They don't think about all of the plethora of tons of other opportunities that the industry presents itself to, which I'm absolutely sure Dee can relate to that.
Well, I wish I could stand here today and say I had this like well-defined plan that I was going to enter the industry and do great things. That was not the case at all. I literally happened into aviation. So had a neighbor who had a small company in Maryland and needed some help for during the summer. And so I went to work there, and I ended up, for some reason, I don't even know how it happened, but I ended up working for their main planner. And in this particular, it was an engineering firm. This planner, showed me how to do program management, scheduling, and resource planning and stuff. So, and I was fascinated by that. So that kind of turned into, a direction that I thought I would like to go. And I went. Now I'm going to really date myself, Vince. There was a small company called
I'm with you.
Martin
Totally
Marietta
with
at the
you.
time. Martin was standing up their new air traffic control division here in DC. Martin at the time was headquartered out in Denver. So I applied for their strategic planning position and was very fortunate and got it. And our customer was the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. So from there, I would say it kind of took off. I moved.
Unintended.
Yeah, that was. I was practicing to see if you catch it, but I had the ability to move from planning into program management. Ended up running what at the time was called major system acquisitions. I managed several large communications programs that provided communications between facilities and the crews up in the aircraft, air-to-ground comms. I did some program work in the what we call navigation. That's where an aircraft is. So, I mean, I had a lot of great experience. And then I decided that I needed to go back into industry. Was made aware of an opportunity at a large telecommunications company to manage a big program. And the reason that I was approached is because it was perceived that I spoke Fed, and there was a federal client. So
I've never heard that term before. Spoke Fed. Okay.
Stick with me, Vince. You'll learn a lot.
I'm going to stick with you on it.
Anyway, so I did that for a while, and then migrated over actually to a think tank because I was working some international policy with this federal customer and the telecommunications, and I found that I really like international policy. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I have an engineering and a management background, but I just really resonated with the idea of getting agreements in place. So I did that at this think tank, and then the FAA called back and said, "Hey, we need someone to come back to our international operations." So I went back and eventually.
Ooh, what happened? Hello?
organization, which was fabulous and funny, dealing with a lot of his former colleagues for transport in the UK. So yeah, it was kind of fun. The other thing, without going, because we'll be here all afternoon if I tell you about my whole career progression, but I've been blessed because I've been in and out of government several times in many parts of the industry. And, it's a truism in aviation and aerospace. You never know where you're going to end up because there's so many opportunities. And, Vince, you were talking earlier about that what's ahead for the workforce, the richness of opportunities for the workforce. And,
Yes.
I would say, that has been just an absolute truism throughout my career. Again, I mentioned earlier, I worked in the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation. I've worked in their air traffic organization and aviation safety. And go ahead, I've heard all the jokes. I can't keep a job. But I will also note for a lot of folks that may be listening, you may have read over the last few years about the tension between telecommunications and aviation as 5G was implemented in the U.S. I
Good
was
point to bring up.
the FAA's lead on that program, and
Oh, wow.
talk about coming full circle, right? From going from this
Yeah,
early
absolutely.
opportunity at a telco, who, by the way, is now out of business, but to lead this effort on 5G. And I will say, from the bottom of my heart, it was one of the most rewarding career experiences, because not only did we managed to keep the NAS up and operating and nothing bad happened and people have their 5G service and there's more to come, but that we were able to have two industries ultimately work together to resolve very, very complicated technical considerations. So I'm sorry, I kind of went off on a riff.
Oh no, that's okay. Hearing your passion and excitement for the things that you've done, particularly in reference to the things that you've done with the FAA, is really great. And it makes me want to take a quick moment and just kind of give some kudos and appreciation to the FAA. A lot of people, anybody can be a Monday morning quarterback and criticize something, but we do have the safest airspace in the world. And we have that because the FAA does what they do very well. No, they're not perfect, but then who is? But when you consider the amount of traffic and the things that you brought up earlier, like all of the other things that are now integrating into the system,
Right.
the drones, the advanced air mobility, um, the cadence, as you put it, the frequency of rocket launches and things like that, and all of that requires a lot of coordination and special efforts and extra efforts and things like that. So again, hats off to the FAA for doing what they do, and hats off to you for all the things that you've been involved in. But you give a great example too, Dee. Both you and David give great examples of something that comes up a lot, and that is something that is, I think, is really important, and that is to let the up and coming generation know that, hey, your path is not going to be a straight line in most cases. It's going to zig, it's going to zag, you're going to have a few ups and downs, and things are going to it's going to be a minute before you get to where you want to go. The cool thing about the aviation and aerospace industry is that could end up being just about anywhere, as you
100%.
just spoke of. I mean, it literally can. You can be doing one thing, which I always say, don't burn any bridges. Make sure you you keep in mind that as big as of an industry we are, we're also a small industry in certain respects. And so, if you want to continue to climb that ladder and grow and absorb all the things the industry offers, then you want to, make sure that you keep that in mind as you go through things and stuff like that. David, I was going to come to you again because we were talking about technology, and I know in terms of sustainability and the advanced technology that comes into play with that, I think is important. But I also think it can be a delicate balance between technological innovation and still, you know, uh, um, being able to keep things on track in terms of the goals with sustainability and things like that. Can you articulate that better than I just did?
Um, I think that's very fair. When it comes to sustainability, I mentioned some of the goals we've set, and the 2050 goal we have as an industry is sort of the big one, the one we point to a lot. There's a lot we don't necessarily know about what technology will be capable of in 2050. We talked a bit about AAM and some of these new types of aircraft, and maybe some of those technologies will allow us to move towards more electric aircraft in the future, maybe smaller electric regional aircraft. Those don't exist yet. Likewise, we have some companies looking at hydrogen aircraft, which obviously is a really cool concept. The idea of being able to fly completely zero carbon emissions is great. But again, those don't exist yet. They may
But
be.
they're working on those things, right?
They are.
I mean, they're testing and, doing the research, the R&D on it and things like that.
And I have no doubt we'll see them in the next 5-10 years. We'll see these in some form. But I think when we talk about sustainability, it's really important to note that the aircraft that are being built today, the aircraft that are going to be built for the next 10 years, are going to be flying in 2050. So we have this goal, and we can't just rely on these new aircraft that are going to come out. We need to look at the future, but we also need to concentrate on how we decarbonize the fleet we have now and the fleet we're going to have in the coming decades. So sustainable aviation fuels are really important there. They might not be as glamorous as some of these new technologies, but are going to be really fundamental to achieving the industry goals we've set. Personally, I'm very excited by the prospect of seeing those first electric aircraft in the next couple of years. I think AAM can serve as a really useful pathway for helping mature some of those technologies. So we might see them on maybe slightly bigger routes, regional routes as well in the coming decades.
Is there anything that you guys are working on in terms of AIA in particular that's like on your front burner that's really you're giving a lot of time to and placing a lot of emphasis on or priority?
I think I can speak on the sustainability piece at first. It's sort of two-track. As I just gave a long diatribe about how important SAF is, and we obviously want to see government support for that, because while SAF exists at the moment, it's really expensive. Not enough of it is produced. So as an industry, we really need that support to help scale up the production and use of SAF. But that being said, AIA represents manufacturers, and we're in the business of building new aircraft, new engines, and new technology. So alongside that, I think making sure that we continue to maintain the US's position at the forefront of aviation and aerospace innovation is really important. There's some really good public-private partnerships that the US government has, such as NASA's aeronautics program, such as the FAA's CLEAN program, which is where the governments partner with industry to help develop some of these new sustainable technologies we have in place. I think making sure that we keep that focus on maintaining that leadership and innovation we have is really important. We're seeing in Europe, other parts of the world like China, that they're actually outspending the US government by several times to really try and challenge that leadership position. And I know when I speak on AIA, I talk about how important it is that we try and we're not looking to necessarily go out and spend billions of dollars like those countries are, but we need to make sure we don't take that position we currently have for granted.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really great point too. And I was actually also thinking of the fact that you brought up NASA. NASA actually spends a lot of, or makes a lot of effort towards sustainability and towards being concerned. As much as they do about putting rockets in space and sending stuff to the moon and beyond, they're also very focused on and very cognizant of how important it is to address the environmental, footprint and the impact that it would have.
Absolutely. And I think historically, if you look at a lot of the innovations that have been adopted by the aerospace aviation industry, a lot of those have come about through collaboration with NASA. And I think NASA is doing some really important work now on the sustainability front, looking at incorporating electrification into aircraft, looking at potentially new airframe designs, new engine designs, even on things like quiet supersonic flight. addressing that noise issue, which is was sort of the death of the Concorde.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You brought up exactly. No, I didn't mean, I wasn't trying to cut you off, but you brought up, I was just about to ask you about that because the development of supersonic flight, it's, it's
Right.
funny. We had this major push on it back in the 60s and rolled into the 70s. And then it just kind of dissipated because of the sonic boom factor. You could only fly over the pond and things like that. And now, in fact, I know that I just recently, and you probably know more about it than I do, that NASA is currently testing with an aircraft, like an experimental aircraft, to test the effect of the boom and over certain parts of going across the United States to then analyze that and determine, what needs to be done and how it affects and what people can hear and what kind of impact it has.
Yeah. So
I see you. Go ahead.
You're referring to NASA's X-59 program, which is their
There you go. Thank you. I knew you knew more
supersonic
about it than I
demonstrator.
did.
And I think absolutely, supersonic travel is obviously something that excites a lot of people. The idea of being able to travel and get to destinations much faster than we currently do, I think, is one that appeals to a lot of people. But as an industry, we're very cognizant that to do that, we have to ensure sustainability is sort of at the forefront of those future aircraft. That's the case whether it comes to noise, whether it comes to ensuring that these aircraft use sustainable aviation fuel so that they can operate in a sustainable way. You mentioned the experiments that the NASA were doing there. I actually had the opportunity to go to an event NASA did a couple of years ago where they were mimicking the sounds that these aircraft would make. And honestly, so quiet. I don't think we're there yet, and we don't necessarily have enough data to derive conclusions from that. But having witnessed that firsthand on the ground, it was really encouraging to know that actually we may be in a situation where going forward that we do have that dream of sustainable supersonic flight.
Yeah, point taken. Dee, I was going to come to you, but you are sideways right now.
Well, it's been said before. I'm just noticing that myself.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if it was something that you
no, it's
may have touched or if it
this
just kind of did
iPad
it by itself.
obviously has a mind of its own. Let me try to. I'm going to go dark. I apologize for doing this and try to get this fixed because it's a little disconcerting.
No problem.
Yeah, and David, I was going to ask maybe is it worth maybe touching upon? I think you did early on the international coordination that's taking place through ICAO and CAPE and everything. And I will be right back.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No problem.
Yeah. So for those of your listeners who don't know, Vince, aviation is I would say fairly unique in that we have an international UN body, ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, where a lot of aviation rules, standards are harmonized at that international level. In an industry as international as ours, that's really important. You can't have different rules leaving, say, France and arriving in the US. So it's something that's always been fundamental to how we operate is that common harmonized approach. And I think when you talk about sustainability, a global challenge like climate change, it's doubly important because you can't have one country going ahead of the rest and we're still burning, say, CO2 in another part of the world. So as US manufacturers, as US industry, we're really keen to ensure that there is a level playing field globally. The FAA has done some really sort of led some really important work there, pushing to establish the long-term aspirational goal that the governments have agreed to, which matches that industry goal of being net zero by 2050. And looking forward, I think ICAO is going to be a really important forum for ensuring that we make the progress we want as an industry.
Yeah, that's great to bring up too. Go ahead, Dee.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you. Not sure what happened there, but and David, I'm glad you mentioned it because Vince, I was going to tie in, in addition to the priority that AIA has put on sustainability, and I mentioned this early on, and I'll probably say it 3 more times during this discussion. Obviously, aviation safety remains number one for us. So the work that we're undertaking, and I can elaborate on that, I think is critical for the industry, and it's not as a result of things that people believe happened recently or whatever. Aviation safety has been at the core of our industry from day one. And we have continued to learn and improve. And Vince, you said it yourself. We operate the safest and the biggest aviation system in the world. But also top of the priority buckets in civil for us is the spectrum. I talked about 5G. The reason it remains a priority is, 5G is going to continue to develop. It's an exciting telecommunications technology. We're still in the midst of coming up with long-term solutions to make sure that avionics on board aircraft are protected, and when they're operating in certain parts of the spectrum. And let's also be very realistic. Telecommunications advances happen a lot quicker than aviation does. So their technologies will continue to evolve, and that's going to require more spectrum. So you put those pieces together. So, again, our future is about seeing how we ensure safe coexistence as these two very vital U.S. industries are continuing to grow. And then, I think we've all touched upon it. Another key priority is integrating these new technologies into the NAS. And the point that David raised about with regard to sustainability, I would offer that in conjunction with international partners, whether it's regulators or other entities, or through forum like ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, it's in our collective best interest to coordinate and harmonize, whether it's a safety regulation, whether it's how we integrate the emerging technologies, even on the spectrum, pieces. So there's a real similarity to all of this. The topics are different, but in a lot of ways there's very common needs and very common approaches to ensuring that when an aircraft is traveling from the U.S. to Europe to Asia to wherever in the world it's going to go, that the flight crews and the airlines themselves are not confronted by, okay, when I'm in this airspace, I have to do this. And when I'm in this airspace, I have to do something completely different. That, that doesn't make anyone's day.
Well,
Vince, I think I interrupted you. I apologize.
No, not at all. You both have talked about something that I think is a big piece of all of this, and that's the collaborative effort, whether it's domestic or international. And there's two reasons. So one is what you guys are talking about. The other thing I like about a collaborative effort, it seems like aviation and aerospace can get us all on the same page, which in this day and time when there's so many other crazy things going on, it's kind of nice to know that there's at least this one area that we can all kind of agree to and work with each other on. But more importantly, what I really wanted to bring up too is that coming back to opportunities in the industry, because a lot of people don't realize that, whether it's a space launch or some of the technology that you're talking about, new technology, the electric air taxi type of vehicles, advanced air mobility, or supersonic, or all of these things that you're talking about, and some of the other pieces that come into play, are all different entities that work together, and therefore it is the opportunity can be just about with any of these different types of companies. I guess a more specific example for me to say is like if the people that put the Mars rover on the rover on Mars, along with the helicopter Ingenuity, there were thousands of people involved with that project. Somebody dealt with just the blade, and somebody dealt with the propulsion and et cetera, and somebody had to know how to pack it so that it could be unpacked on Mars and undamaged. Just using that as one specific example. So.
And I think it goes probably even broader than that, Vince. I think talking about sustainable aviation fuel, there's opportunities to work with a whole different type of workforce on the agricultural front to actually produce the feedstock for those fuels.
Precisely. That's exactly.
You have some really cool companies working on actually carbon capture that can be combined with hydrogen to create sustainable aviation fuel. So there's the technology part, but there's the wider industry as well, and the collaboration that will exist going forward in those other sectors too.
Absolutely. Dee?
Yeah, I think when you were chatting, what went through my mind was an opportunity I had. I was visiting one of the AAM manufacturers on the West Coast a few years ago, and they gave me a virtual reality headset to put on. I could experience what the flight would be like. It was from a small location in the South Bay up to San Francisco Airport, and the people I was talking to, I'm just looking at them and I'm like, I'm not a gamer, so I don't wear those things, and they're like, no. And what they were trying to describe was, this is going to create the excitement, about, because you could actually see the actual landmarks. And I've used that analogy, Vince, a few times. I'm on the, let me do a shameless plug here for a moment, at the board of the International Aviation Women's Association. And
Oh, that's not shameless. That's a great plug.
well, it's important because a big part of, we call it Iowa, a big part of Iowa's focus is about creating enthusiasm for women to join aerospace. And I've used that story for so many times because I said, in my expectation of that trip was, I was going out there because at the time I was FAA and we were talking about certification. I thought it was going to be another boring, certification meeting. And it was anything but, because all of a sudden their whole business model and everything came to life literally in front of my eyes. And I think that is kind of, when we talk about the workforce of the future and the opportunities, I think we spend a lot of time, I know certainly within AIA, talking about, it's critical that we have workforce available for the here and now, but equally important for the future. And where is it that we start intersecting, in their schools or in their, whatever the medium is, to try and get the word out there that there are such an array of possibilities for people. And like David said, he's a history major. Again, the government, the FAA needs history majors. It's just
Believe
one
it
of
or
these
not,
things.
absolutely.
And I think, equally important, it's not just for the future, it's how we ensure that we have the workforce, today's workforce, that they're able to deal with the things we were talking about earlier, the new technologies, the new materials, the new manufacturing processes. What are what are the educational or the credentialing steps that we need to go through in order to make sure that those workers are able to do their jobs. So, again, I think, Vince, is certainly a topic you're very familiar with. When we say workforce, there are it's like sustainability, it's like safety. There's so many pieces.
So many different aspects.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is a good point here to also talk about, and I'd love to hear both of your opinions, because I think you would both cover similar and different areas in this. And that is, if you're talking to high school and college students, what kind of advice would you give them based on your experiences currently in the industry and what you see with the industry going forward? What would you tell them?
David, you want to start? You want me to start?
I can say from my perspective, as I've talked about, I never identified aviation as a field I wanted to go into when I was younger. I probably had preconceptions about the type of jobs that it was, so engineering or being a pilot or maintenance, but I didn't really think below that surface. So I would definitely say sort of keep an open mind there on the opportunities that exist. And I think also from my perspective, realizing that you don't have to commit when you're 12 or when you're 18 or even when you're 22 to what that future career looks like. I think being open to opportunities as they arise, seeing some of maybe the non-obvious ways you can apply the skills that you have in an industry that you want, all things that I would recommend people bear in mind when they're thinking about those future career decisions.
Sure. Dee?
Yeah, and from my perspective, I mean, I'm going to have to say my lead in, and I've talked to many, many, many groups about this. Is, first and foremost, be nice and work hard, right? And the thing about what I would say to the high schoolers or whatever is, take risks. You like David just said, you think that you've got the plan and you go in and you realize that's not exactly what I thought it was going to be. Just take a chance. Take a chance on doing something that you could maybe never envisioned doing, and see how that works out. Because rarely, if ever, is it such a mistake that you can't reel back from it. And I would say, this is a kind of discussion I've had not only with younger people, if you will, but with my contemporaries. Because again, from my personal experience, my career was marked by being in and out of the public domain, going into private industry, coming back. And there's no guarantees when you make moves like that. And some people are much more comfortable staying in kind of one place for the entirety of their career. I think our world generally, in addition to our industry, is evolving so much that it's harder to do that. I mean, I think, I would say, coming back to the high schoolers, is, if something seems intriguing, give it a whirl and listen to advice. And people get discouraged very easily. Something else I've also found, they have thought a situation was going to be one way and it doesn't work out that way. The good news is there's a lot of other opportunities around, but I also believe you got to give everything a chance, right? If the first 2 weeks in, it's like, and I've been scared to death at some of my new jobs 2 weeks in, and I just made myself suck. Like wise man once said to me, "Suck it up, Buttercup. It looks like I've done that flip again." Excuse me.
I I had when we
I
had
wish I
the
could tell you I engineered that. That is so beyond my skill set.
when we had the eclipse just recently, and during the eclipse you could see the solar flares off of the sun and everything. The reason I'm bringing that up because there was a young lady that had on the show a year or so ago who got a degree in space weather. And when you hear space weather, you go, huh? Until you think about it for a second, then you go, oh yeah, solar flares and all the different things that are out there. And that makes a lot of sense, that are affected by the sun, blah, 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 blah. Well, fast forward, she is now what's called a space architect. And the first time I heard the term space architect, almost as bad as space weather, but space architect, I was like, okay, I know what an architect is, but how are you a space architect? Well, it turns out that we've had space architects since we first started building capsules and putting them on the Apollo and going out in space and to the moon, et cetera, and so forth. But it's basically a space habitat. Somebody has to design it. Somebody has
Right.
to design the capsule on top of a rocket. They've got to design space station. They've got to design what will take people to the moon and to Mars and things like that. And to you guys' point about being open-minded and not quite knowing what you're going to do, she got her graduate degree in space architecture at the only school in the United States that has that, which is the University of Houston Cullen School of Engineering. And she interned during her graduate work at Johnson Space Center. She's now on their team as a space architect. And she's actually working on stuff for Mars, which is going to be a bit before we go there. But she's looking at what environment they're going to need going, and when they are there, living on Mars, what they're going to need to survive and be safe, et cetera, and so forth. So it can vary quite a bit. As we're kind of getting into the wrap up mode, I wanted to mention something else that I get excited about personally, and that's model rocketry. So I did model rockets when I was a kid, and they weren't that sophisticated back then, but they were model rockets and they worked, and I had a lot of fun with it. And I've seen it kind of almost have like a comeback in recent years. I won't say how many because it's been going on for a while now. where it's gotten popular again. And it's really kind of neat. Maybe it's because the space exploration is very popular now. When there's a major launch, you know, millions of people are watching it on YouTube, on NASA's YouTube channel and things like that. But the model rocketry, I think things like that, model rocketry, robotics, et cetera, and so forth, are great entrees into our industry. You know, it's especially for younger people, it's the beginning of what, you know, can be turned into a career or whatever the case may be. Again, talking about the space thing for a minute, robotics are going to be used on the moon to build stuff and move stuff around and things like that. So somebody knowing about that or having a passion or an interest in that now, it's going to be very applicable pretty quickly. Actually, they're already working on stuff and that type of thing. I was also bringing up but before I go too far off on a tangent, I was bringing up model rocketry because you guys have are involved with the American Rocketry Challenge, I believe it's called. Let's tell everybody about that a little bit.
Sure. I'll go ahead and start, and then David, please add. As Vince, as you just mentioned, AIA sponsors the American Rocketry Challenge, which is the world's largest rocketry challenge. And it's done, and just to maybe boot stomp your point, Vince, it's done to encourage, you know, enthusiasm in the industry and in the STEM careers, right? So the challenge brings together teams from all over, and actually the challenge is coming up soon, mid-May. But I think it's really an opportunity from students from just across the U.S. and I think there's even some international, if I'm recalling this correctly. But just a real opportunity for students to pull together and learn the importance of teamwork and to devise a rocket that's capable of meeting criteria that's been set out. David, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so I know from having attended our rocketry challenge before, it's really it's actually really just impressive to see how many students you have participating, the diversity of backgrounds, people from all over the US taking part. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I think looking back at the history of the competition, there's been something like 100,000, close to 100,000 students who have participated, which I think
oh my God, that's incredible.
Gives a sense of the level of interest there is in rocketry and space, and aerospace generally. And Dee mentioned the international component. So the winner of the US Rocketry Challenge, the American Rocketry Challenge, which AIA organizes, they actually qualify for a trip to London during the Farnborough Air Show for the International Rocketry Challenge. So it's really taking that and giving that opportunity to compete on a global platform as well.
Yeah, and two things are coming up. The Farnborough Air Show is in July.
Yes,
I believe. Yeah, that's coming up over there, and which is a great air show if you can get over to Europe. But you also have something a lot more local right here in our DMV. I think it's taking place on May 18th, and that is that the finals or something.
That's the American Rocketry Challenge on the 18th, and I think if I'm recalling numbers, David, check me. I think there's about 100 teams participating this year.
That's right, and I think the prize in that instance is I believe it's $100,000 for the team, yep. And then the opportunity to compete in that international tournament in the UK.
Wow, that's fantastic, guys. We are running out of time, but I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to kind of share some closing thoughts about the industry, about AIA, and just your perspective. And I'll start with you, David.
Yeah, so I think it's been said by everyone, all three of us, but this is a really exciting time to be involved with the industry. There's so much happening in terms of innovation, some of which may not be as obvious as others. You have the really cool stuff like AAM, drones, commercial space flight, supersonic travel. But you also have maybe the less obvious innovations in in terms of the transition to sustainability, which is where most of my focus is on. I think with all of that happening, it's just a great time to be involved with the industry. I would encourage anyone who's interested in aviation, whether it's on the engineering side or the policy side, whether it's on the fuel manufacturing side, but to really explore all of those opportunities that exist and maybe think of outside of the box if you're not an engineer, about how maybe you can be involved with the industry yourself.
Well said. Dee?
Yeah, I really can't add too much more. I think David has covered it, and hopefully our conversation has, really underscored the enthusiasm that so many of us have for this industry, and really beyond the enthusiasm, a love for this industry. It's comprised of wonderful ideas, wonderful talent, wonderful people. So yeah, I can't say enough about it. And just really in closing, I'm going to butcher this because I don't know how to speak Latin. I have a very good friend who works at Blue Origin, and Blue Origin's motto is gradatim feracitur, step by step ferociously. And I think that really just speaks to our industry, speaks for all of us. So Vince, I've
And
just
you said it
really enjoyed the
perfectly.
conversation.
I'm impressed. Yeah. Dee Reimold and David Hyde, thank you both very much for not only representing AIA, but sharing your insight about the industry and sharing your enthusiasm, the same enthusiasm I think all of us have that are in this industry. I really appreciate having both of you on board, and hopefully our audience learned some things in terms about what you guys do and the impact that you have.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for joining another edition of All Things Aviation and Aerospace, a video webcast and audio podcast production of the Private Air Media Group. It's always my goal with this show to inspire, inform, and encourage aspiring young aviation and aerospace professionals to pursue the abundance of awesome opportunities and possibilities in the aviation and aerospace industries. And most importantly, no matter what your skill set is, there's definitely a place for all of you in one of the most exciting industries on the planet, if you didn't know that we weren't saying that all throughout the show. To watch or listen to my library of other shows, go to All Things Aviation and Aerospace or the Private Air Media Group on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay safe,